What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So I thought we'd go ahead and continue with this top 10 centers position listing. So at number 3, I have Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon. All right. Just to do a brief recap, at number 10, I had Patrick Ewing. Number 9, I have Artis Gilmore. At number 8, George Mikan. Number 7, David Robinson. Number 6, I have Moses Malone. At number 5, Bill Russell. At number 4, Shaquille O'Neal. So at number 3, I have Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon. Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon. Oh, before I forget, shout out to Elijah for your contribution to the channel. Much respect to you, Elijah. He's a frequent contributor of this channel and has been down with Too Raw for TV since 2015. All right, so shout out to Elijah. And shout out to everybody that supports me on YouTube and as well as on the Patreon. And shout out to all you guys that have signed to the Patreon as of late. Now, Hakeem Olajuwon, all right, he played 18 years in the NBA from 1984 until 2002. Most of his career came with the Houston Rockets. I think he played, I think it's one season with the Toronto Raptors. Can't believe whether it was one or two seasons, one of the two. He ended his career with the Toronto Raptors, retiring after the 2001 2002 season. The highlight of his career, of course, or the high point, was 1994 and 1995, where he won back-to-back NBA championships. During the 1993-94 season, I think he's the only player in NBA history. And I gotta think about this. I gotta think about this before I say it. I gotta think about this because I think he's the only one to do it. Someone in the comment section, Scorpio can correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe Olajuwon is the only player in NBA history to win a regular season MVP, a Finals MVP, and the Defensive Player of the Year award all in the same season. All right, I'm trying to think if someone else has done that, but I can't think of anybody off the top of my head that's done that. And the Houston Rockets, during the absence of Michael Jordan in the mid 1990s, asserted themselves as a Cinderella darling, especially in the '95 season. And Hakeem Olajuwon established himself as the best player in the NBA during that particular time. Um, Many people consider Hakeem Olajuwon the most skilled center in the history of the NBA. I'm going to say something right now that might seem a little bit controversial, but it's, my thoughts, okay? I've noticed that a lot of people have been assigning Nikola Jokic as the most skilled center, and I don't think that Jokic, as good as he is, and I think he will go down as the greatest passing big man of all time. But Nikola Jokic could not do what Hakeem Olajuwon could do. He couldn't dream of doing it. Okay, Olajuwon was faster. He was quicker. He had a much more varied offensive game. Olajuwon, along with Kevin McHale, are the two greatest post players in the history of the NBA. But Kevin McHale, as dominant as he was in the low post, that didn't extend to the high post, where Hakeem Olajuwon, the further that he went out, could also illustrate his ball handling ability, which at the time you did not see in a big man. Okay, Olajuwon had a plethora of moves. His range extended much further than the average center of his era. Remember, when he was playing, most centers generally stayed within the paint. Olajuwon's jump shot exceeded 17, 18 feet in regularity. Sometimes, when he got it going, he could actually shoot from 3-point range. That's something that you did not see back in the 80s into the 90s. Um, Olajuwon, of course, his signature move was the dream shake. Um, you know, and defensively, he was as dominant, maybe even more so. He led the NBA in rebounding, I think, twice. Led the league in shot blocking a couple times, something that Shaquille O'Neal could never do. Now, while he never led the NBA in scoring, some of that was due to design of the offense. There were some years, especially under Don Chaney, where the team was playing more outside in. And early on, of course, he shared the spotlight with Ralph Sampson, Twin Towers, they carried. Um, what else do I want to say? He was a very good passing big man. All right. I believe he averaged in excess of 3 assists per game for his career, which is very high for a big man. Um, and he's the all time leading shot blocks leader at 3,830. Although we have to keep in mind that blocks were not counted until the 1973-74 season, and that the official blocks leader probably Wilt Chamberlain. Okay, and Wilt retired the year before they officially began counting um, blocks. Now, for a guy that's as skilled as he was and as dominant as he was, right, and he routinely outplayed the great centers of his era, whether you're talking about Shaq or David Robinson or Patrick Ewing or Rick Smits or Tumbo or Alonzo Mourning and others. Why is he not considered the GOAT at that position? Well, there are some people who will tell you that perhaps maybe he doesn't win those 2 championships if Michael Jordan never retires. Now that's a very that's one of those debates that is much more opinionated. Uh, there's a lot of holes in that argument, but um, there's some people that will tell you that. Also, Elijah One lost a lot in his career. He did win the 2 NBA championships, and there was that 2 year period where he was unstoppable. But there were a lot of times in the playoffs where Elijah One underperformed. And one of the most stunning statistics that I've seen about him that hurt him as far as GOAT argument is concerned is the fact that in his 18-year career, his teams lost in the first round or missed the playoffs in 9 of his 18 years as a player. Either they did not make the playoffs or they lost in the first round. So that kind of hurts him overall as far as his resume is concerned. But he will go down as one of the great, great, great centers in the history of the NBA. Now, Hakeem Olajuwon was born in Nigeria in 1963, and like many young people from his country at that time, the number one sport was soccer. Now, playing soccer would help him later on as a basketball player when it pertained to his balance. He was a great athlete, but it would help him with his balance and footwork. Okay, he took to basketball very late, similar to Tim Duncan. I think Tim Duncan started playing basketball when he was 14. Olajuwon did not start playing basketball until he was 15 years old, which is very late. But he took to it like a fish out of water, and at the same time, he was experiencing a tremendous growth spurt. And there were many scouts that looked at him and thought that there was a lot of potential there. By the time Olajuwon was 17 or 18 years old, he was already at his full height of 6'10" and a half. Okay, so by this time, Hakeem Olajuwon had drew some interest, even though he was in Nigeria. He had drew some interest from those in the University of Houston, all the way to University of Houston, right? Um, but he was not heavily, um, he wasn't heavily scouted, or where I say heavily touted. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. And he actually had to fly from Nigeria to Houston. And then once he arrived in Houston, had to take a taxi from the airport to go to the University of Houston. All right. And I believe his first year he did not play. He was red lettered his first year, and then partially red lettered his second year. And he played sparingly his second year in Houston. But increasingly, he began scrimmaging with Moses Malone. Now, at this time, you got to remember, this is 1981, 82. At the time, Moses Malone was playing with the Houston Rockets. This is when Moses Malone was winning league MVPs and was the best center in the NBA. And he was scrimmaged with Moses Malone to improve his overall play. And it worked. And over the next 3 years, alongside his teammate Clyde Drexler, with their very exciting athletic play called Five Slamma Jamma, for 3 consecutive years they made the Final Four. Now they never won the NCAA title, but unfortunately, the first time, what was it? I think the first year, who did they lose to? Was it the was it North Carolina State? I'm a little bit fuzzy as to like who it was the first time, but one of them, of course, was the loss to Jim Valvano in North Carolina State. I can't remember the other teams in unison, but anyway, even though they made it to the Final Four 3 consecutive years, they weren't able to go all the way. Um, Clyde Drexler left him in '83. Of course, Clyde was a year ahead of him. Clyde went to the Portland Trailblazers. Olajuwon decided to leave in '84, a year early. He got there in '81. He decided to leave in '84, excuse me, because he thought that'd have been a much better chance that year of him playing and staying in the Houston area and playing for the Houston Rockets franchise. Now, at that time, Moses Malone had been traded to the Philadelphia 76ers. Ralph Sampson was a power forward, so the team did need a center. And of course, with the first pick of the 1984 draft, the Houston Rockets did select Hakeem Olajuwon. Now, I just did a video prior to this one talking about how they had came pretty close to actually acquiring Michael Jordan and Clyde Drexler had they gone for it. But Hakeem Olajuwon had a strong rookie year. He did not win Rookie of the Year, but he was on the All-Rookie first team, of course. I don't know the numbers off my head. I'm kind of going off memory right now. I'm not looking at anything, okay? So I'm not going to be as detailed, all right? So initially he formed a tandem with Ralph Sampson. They were the Twin Towers. They were the Twin Towers before, David Robinson and Tim Duncan, and they were more formidable in my opinion. Um, you have Ralph Sampson, who was 7'4", 230 pounds, one of the great collegiate players of all times. Um, you know, he had tremendous athleticism, but he had certain skill sets that you didn't see normally from a big man. and you had Olajuwon dominating in the low post, whereas Ralph Sampson could, do more of his thing occasionally in the low post, but he was showcasing more of his game in the high post, and you had a tremendous tandem and tremendous front court that nobody really could deal with. And that team made it all the way to the NBA Finals in 1986 off a miracle shot by Ralph Sampson against the Lakers in the '86 playoffs. And that team managed to sneak 2 games away from the '86 Boston Celtics. And if Olajuwon had any goddamn help in that series from Ralph Sampson and others, then maybe they could have upset the Boston Celtics, but it wasn't to be. Now, by 1987, 1988, Ralph Sampson was suffering a rash of injuries, and it was becoming apparent that that team was going to be more reliant on Hakeem Olajuwon, and they became a mediocre team. And year in and year out, whether it was bad coaching or a lack of talent around him, the Houston Rockets were always one and dones, or they even qualified for the playoffs. And by the early 1990s, Don Chaney, who was the head coach, nice guy, but you know, when Don Chaney was the coach of the Houston Rockets, he had them playing more outside in. He had Vernon Maxwell, excuse me, and Kenny Smith being the number one, number two options, and Olajuwon averaging more around 20, 21 points a game. Obviously it did not work. And by 1992, before the 1992-93 season, Olajuwon was damn near traded. He was that frustrated, he wanted out of Houston. Fortunately, they were able to talk Olajuwon into staying and being committed. They fired the coach. In comes Reed Tomjanovich. In comes these pieces that would form and lead to a run for the Houston Rockets for several seasons. In comes rookie Robert Horry. Reed Tomjanovich refocused the offense around Olajuwon. They made sure to put perimeter scorers around him, but to have him as the focal point more so. Not as much ISO perimeter, but more spot up shooting. So now, you know, they had Robert Horry, who's essentially a stretch four. Then you add, of course, Sam Cassell and Tracy Murray, who's also a great outside shooter. Excuse me, I'm thinking about later on in his career. But the Houston Rockets are an improved franchise. Now, in the 1993 playoffs, many people will tell you that their series between them and the Sonics was rigged. All right? The NBA did not want the Rockets to advance to the NBA Finals. And the reason why is because the reason why they didn't want them to win that series. And by the way, the Seattle Sonics of the 1990s were like the kryptonite to the Houston Rockets for some reason. For some reason, the Seattle Sonics of the 90s gave Houston hell. They gave Houston serious fucking problems. The same way that the Chicago Bulls had problems with Houston in the early 90s, the Sonics gave the Houston Rockets problems. I just want to put that out there. But I think the reason why that series was rigged is because had the Houston Rockets faced the Phoenix Suns, who everybody wanted to go to the finals, the glaring weakness up front by Phoenix, they would have had nobody to guard Olajuwon, by the way. Um, that might have been enough for Houston to beat Phoenix. Okay, um, that's part of it. But anyway, the next year, the Houston Rockets start off, I think, something like 15-0 during the regular season. They went off to a tremendous start, slowed down a little bit, but they finished with 58 wins, which at the time was a franchise record. And in 1994, of course, they make it to the NBA Finals, right, for the third time in franchise history. Of course, they went to the finals in 81 and 86, but they were 0-2. And they were up against the New York Knicks, who finally had crawled from the shadow of Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. And Patrick Ewing and Olajuwon were battling for their legacy. Okay? At this time, both centers, now let's go back in time to 1994, both centers were looked at as underachievers. Both tremendous all-time great centers, top 50 players, but they had not won a championship. Okay, and you could argue maybe Olajuwon had done more with less, uh, but still, that series raged on for 7 games, going through all that OJ bullshit back then. Remember, uh, the Knicks should have won that series, in my opinion. They were the more talented overall team, the tougher team, but Hakeem Olajuwon did a great job on Patrick Ewing. He held him to 18 points a game, which you definitely need more than that to beat the Houston Rockets. Olajuwon averaged 25 and 10 and came away with his first ever NBA championship. All right. The next year, the Houston Rockets struggled a bit. Okay. The Houston Rockets struggled a bit. They're dealing with injuries. They're in a funk. So what happens is, I think it was was it right before or after the All-Star break? They acquired Clyde Drexler, and that was the shot in the arm they needed. They needed another secondary score. Excuse me for a second. They acquired Clyde Drexler. That was just shot in the arm they needed, and they finished the season 46-36. They were the 6th seed, and I remember at that time a lot of people were talking about their championship like hopes is basically like a dream, like a pipe dream. Like the odds just weren't in their favor. They were gonna have to win on the road virtually every series. They were gonna have to win on the road. But they did it. They did it. In the first round they played against the formidable Karl Malone, John Stockton, Utah Jazz. Okay? And this is when the Utah Jazz were on the upswing and were quickly becoming the dominant team that they became in the late 1990s. I can't remember how many games they won. I think they won 60. I think they won 60 games that year. I think Utah went 60-22 that year. So the Houston Rockets, they weren't going up against cupcakes. You know what I'm saying? They were going up against formidable teams. And the Houston Rockets beat Utah in the first round. I think something like 3-1. And then in the second round, of course, that's when they overcame a 3-1 deficit. They were going up against the Phoenix Suns, who were 59-23 that year, if I'm not mistaken. Charles Barkley guaranteed a playoff victory, saying there was no way they were going to blow a 3-1 lead. And of course, Game 7, the kiss of death game, even though Kevin Johnson poured in 46 points. And I think that was one of the last great Kevin Johnson performances that we saw before injuries, um, derailed his career. Um, Mario Ellie hit what would be the series clinching 3-pointer, and they came back and won that series 4-3. And then, of course, in the Western Conference Finals, they played against the team with the best record in the NBA, the 62-20 San Antonio Spurs. And remember, Olajuwon did what he did in that series against a front line that included David Robinson and Dennis Rodman. Yeah, and Olajuwon, of course, eviscerated David Robinson in that series. David Robinson, I think, averaged something like 23 points and 11 rebounds, which are good numbers in that series. But Olajuwon averaged like I think something like 35 and 12, um, and they won that series. I think 4 games to 2. And then in the NBA Finals, they played against the Orlando Magic. The Magic were supposed to win that series. The Magic had won 57 games that year, but were 39-2 at home and had been undefeated at home in the playoffs until that game. Until that game, the game where Houston was down 20 points in the first half, but they had no answer and made no adjustments for Kenny Smith, who was the unsung hero in that game, hit what was at the time a finals record 7 3-pointers, including the 3-pointer to send his team into overtime when it came back from the deficit, with Nick Anderson missing 4 free throws in a row. And then I still remember that last play where Clyde Drexler was driving baseline. I believe he tried to lay it up over Shaq. It missed off the backboard, but Olajuwon was able to tip it back in, and for the score in what was ultimately the deciding basket in that game. And then ultimately, Houston just rode momentum for the rest of that series and won their second championship. It was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, championship runs I've ever seen. Now, for the rest of Olajuwon's career, it was just adding to his legacy. Michael Jordan came back from the NBA. A lot of attention was on Chicago. People kind of forgot a little bit about Houston. Olajuwon had another strong season in 95, 96. Can't remember the exact numbers, but probably something around 26 or 27 points, 11 rebounds, maybe 3 assists, 2 steals, probably around 50% from the floor, 70 plus percent from the foul line. A typical Olajuwon season. They lost in the first round though I think they lost in the first round to the Seattle Supersonics, or it might have been the second round. Can't remember. Might have been the second round. Then, of course, in '96 they acquired Charles Barkley, which was supposed to have been a super team. They started off 21-2, but injuries and age hurt them. Barkley and Drexler missed a lot of time due to injuries. Olajuwon had a strong season, but even he was starting to show signs of age. They won 57 games, but they made it to the Western Conference Finals against the Utah Jazz. But ultimately, John Stockton hit the biggest shot of his career, the biggest shot of Utah Jazz's history, which sent them to the NBA Finals. And that was pretty much the nail in the coffin when it comes to Hakeem Olajuwon's championship chances after that. Afterwards, it was a slow but inevitable decline. The Houston Rockets would make it to the playoffs, but less and less, and fewer were the playoff games they were playing, and they were becoming more of a second round exit team, and then ultimately a first round exit team as new teams were coming up. The Lakers, the Spurs, the Kings, the Mavericks. Um, these new teams were coming of prominence, and Hakeem Olajuwon was falling off as a dominant player. I believe it was the 2001, after the 2001 season, Hakeem Olajuwon, I believe, was traded to the Toronto Raptors, and he would play one season there, but then retired after the 2001 2002 season. I remember him having some type of lung issue where he didn't have a lot of stamina, and He retired after 2001, 2002 season. Um, Olajuwon was a very, very dominant center. He's the only center in the history of the NBA to rank among the top 10 all time in steals. Okay, he's a two-time NBA champion, twice NBA Finals MVP in 94, 95. In fact, I think he scored the last bucket of the Houston Rockets championship run in 95, which was the three-pointer. He won the league MVP award in 94, 12-time NBA All-Star, six-time All-NBA first team, three-time All-NBA second team, three-time All-NBA third team. Twice he was the NBA Defensive Player of the Year in 93 and 94. Five-time NBA All-Defensive first team, four-time All-NBA Defensive second team. He's on the 84-85 All-Rookie first team. Twice he led the NBA in rebounding. Three times NBA blocks leader, 90, 91, and 93. His number 34 retired by the Houston Rockets. He's on the NBA's 50th anniversary all-time team. Consensus first team All-American in 84. He was the NCAA rebounding leader in 84, the SWC Player of the Year in 84, NCAA Final Four Most Outstanding Player in 83. His number 34 is retired by the Houston Cougars. And for his career, Olajuwon scored 26,946 points for 21.8 points per game average. He grabbed 13,747 rebounds, or 11.1 rebounds per game. He blocked 3,830 shots, 3.1 blocks per game, which, of course, would make him the all-time leader in blocks officially. Although, as I've said before, I believe the all-time leader in blocks is really Wilt Chamberlain. And he won Olympic gold in Atlanta in 1996 as a member of Dream Team 2. The third greatest center in the history of the NBA, Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon.